In the aftermath of a devastating drone strike which killed 3 U.S. service people, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans are openly lying to Americans, suggesting that such an attack could have and would never have occurred if Trump were still president. And when one MAGA congressman tried to sell that lie on CNN, he was visibly triggered and flustered by the ensuing fact check. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert buttons before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, we have several clips to look at in this video, but just to give you the ensuing, or rather the predicate facts to what we're about to watch, over the weekend, we learned that an Iranian-backed militia killed 3 U.S. service people and injured like 40 others in a drone strike against a U.S. base in northeastern Jordan. Now, at the time of this recording, I don't know what the military response has been. President Biden has announced publicly that there would be a response, and so has Secretary Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary. But as far as we know, we don't know exactly what it is yet. And in a situation like this, I think it's perfectly fair for anybody, regardless of your political persuasion or your party affiliation, to have serious questions. How did this happen? What are we going to do in response? And is it, does it lean more towards military deterrence? What role, if any, will diplomacy play? What's the tension between these two things? And especially when you consider in the context that we have foreign crises going on in Israel and in Ukraine, right? All of these things are perfectly fair questions to ask, and there are criticisms to direct at the Biden administration, or anybody for that matter, about this situation. But that's not what Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans are doing. They're using it for political fodder. So this was Donald Trump on Truth Social, Truth Central, saying 3 years ago, Iran was weak, broke, and totally under control. Thanks to my maximum pressure policy, the Iranian regime could barely scrape $2 together to fund their terrorist proxies. Then Joe Biden came in and gave Iran billions of dollars, which the regime has used to spread bloodshed and carnage throughout the Middle East. And this is the key sentence. He says, "This attack would, all caps, never have happened if I was president, not even a chance." That is what Donald Trump is trying to sell. He's hoping that enough people will have forgotten what did or did not happen when he was president for 4 years, and all the things, good and bad, that have happened under the Biden administration, that he's thinking, okay, this is a good opportunity to sell the lie. And apparently a lot of Republican elected officials agree. You have Mike Waltz here, a Republican elected official, a representative, trying to sell that lie on CNN, but he hits a bit of a roadblock in the form of Brianna Keilar. So here are 2 clips, and I want you to note how visibly flustered Mike Waltz gets when she fact checks him.
Should the U.S. respond when even former President Trump, you said peace broke out, but his very direct and controversial action, like taking out Soleimani, did not stop the deadly attacks on U.S. troops. So how can the U.S. thread the needle? Well,
Brianna, I'm sorry. We had our ships were attacked. Saudi Aramco was attacked. One of our drones was shot down. And then it was once they actually stormed our embassy and killed an American, President Trump gave the order to take out Iran's field general that was plotting more attacks. And then what happened? They launched some missiles. No, they launched some missiles, and that was it. So show me the service member of the base that was attacked.
Service members died.
Post-Soleimani strike. Who died post-Soleimani strike?
March 20.
I'm sorry, deterrence.
March
was
2020, U.S. service members died. You had Iranian-backed proxies. You had al-Assad, which we all remember because former President Trump downplayed the TBIs, which you certainly know, and I certainly know are a big deal. You had an attack in Kirkuk in February, which looked like it might have been Iran, but the one in March was determined that it very likely was, or that it was, and you had service members, 2 Americans and 1 Brit, who were killed.
So again, note not only how visibly flustered he was, how he recoiled in disgust, and then he kept interrupting her. He would ask her a question, then interrupt her with a filibuster, and then gish-galloped her as well. What's so interesting about this is how he kneecapped his own position. So the position of Mike Waltz and other MAGA Republicans is that, listen, under Trump, there was world peace, or peace in the Middle East, at least. And yet, when Brianna Keilar says, actually, no, there wasn't, then Mike Waltz gets defensive. And he says, okay, well, listen, before we killed Soleimani, who is the top Iranian general that President Trump ordered the assassination of. He was like, all these bad things happened against U.S. interests. And indeed, a U.S. embassy was attacked and an American was killed on Donald Trump's watch, which he says is what predicated the attack on Soleimani. Well, it's like, okay, fine, fair enough. But that just undermined your position, because your position is this wouldn't have happened under Donald Trump the way it happened under President Biden. But actually, you just pointed out all kinds of terrible things that happened on Donald Trump's watch, which you say justified a deterrent response. And then, as Brianna Keilar points out, it actually didn't function as a deterrent because Americans were still attacked after Soleimani was assassinated. So no matter how you look at it, on Donald Trump's watch, Americans and American interests were attacked in the Middle East. So what's your position? Well, the fact check goes further, and again, he continues to get visibly flustered.
Until you hit their actual operatives, like Soleimani or some of their IRGC operatives, and until you dry up the cash, which, for example, we just passed out of the House secondary sanctions on their oil exports.
Trump did that, and then more American service members were killed in response.
The Trump administration hit both the proxies and then eventually Soleimani himself.
In January of 2020 and in March of 2020, American service members were killed.
So there you go. This is the point. What they're banking on, what they're hoping, is that you will have forgotten and I will have forgotten what happened under the Trump administration. And listen, I want to be very clear. I have a political science degree. I'm obsessed with politics. I can't remember all this stuff. So much of this stuff I've forgotten. The average American who's not obsessed with politics, who has, other hobbies, probably much more productive hobbies, of course they're not going to remember all this. And so Trump has an advantage here because, again, he's blanking on revisionist history to make his case. And so are MAGA Republicans like Mike Wals, who frankly should know better, right? Zachary Henry here on Twitter, in response to Mehdi Hassan, he says, having a hard time remembering all of those attacks by Iran and their military factions during the last year of Trump's term after he took out Soleimani. Nicholas Grossman, who is a foreign policy professor and expert, he debunks the whole notion. He says, listen, Iran wouldn't mess with tough Trump, says MAGA, opposite of reality. First, Iran and militias it backs got more aggressive after Trump broke the JCPOA, which is the Iran nuclear deal. Donald Trump pulled us out. Now, Iran is closer than ever to having nuclear weapons because Donald Trump removed the one deterrent, which is the JCPOA, that was keeping them from doing so. I digress. They attacked tankers, Saudi oil fields, U.S. bases, then killing Iranian General Soleimani. Ended it, right? No, wrong again. And he walks through the timelines. March 11th, Iran-aligned militias conducted indirect fire attacks on Camp Taji, killing 3 defeat ISIS personnel and wounding others. This was followed by a second rocket attack on Camp Taji on March 14th, wounding several Iraqi and other defeat ISIS personnel. On December 20th, Iran-aligned militias conducted indirect fire attacks on Embassy Baghdad with 20 rockets, resulting in material damage, plus many unsuccessful attacks on U.S. bases while Trump was in office, to say nothing of what Brianna pointed out herself, right? The fact that U.S. service people were killed by Iran or Iran-backed proxies after Soleimani was assassinated. And here's the other point, because I've heard this too. Every time a U.S. serviceman or woman or person dies under President Biden, we hear this from MAGA Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump. This would never have happened on my watch. But the fact of the matter is, and facts don't care about your feelings, so says Ben Shapiro, there were 65 active duty, hostile action military deaths under Donald Trump. Not just, people dying of heart attack. 65 U.S. personnel were killed in firefights, in hostile action and hostile engagements while Donald Trump was president, which is, as of this moment, many more than have died under President Biden. And the loss of any U.S. citizen or any U.S. service person is a tragedy. But if we're going to try to reduce it to raw numbers, if we're going to try to say that Joe Biden is somehow a failure of a president because U.S. service people have died on his watch, then by that logic, Donald Trump is objectively more of a failure. And there's simply no getting around it, at least for now. But again, MAGA either has lost their own memory, which is possible, right? It's entirely possible some of these people have forgotten. It's very more likely that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Mike Wals, people who know better because they're sitting members of Congress, right? They have access to this information. What they're banking on is that you won't recognize their lies because you'll have forgotten about the damage that was done under the Trump administration. And we're in an election year, right? So these lies will have an outsized impact. And President Biden is managing many, certainly international foreign crises, but he's still managing tough issues here at home, right? So MAGA is going to try every possible vector of attack. And one of them is to try to appeal to people's sense of patriotism and say, listen, you support our military, you support our troops, and you can't support Joe Biden because look how they're dying on his watch. When the fact of the matter is these attacks did occur, attacks of these type rather, did occur under Donald Trump. They still occurred when he tried to deter Iran. And these could happen under any president because, believe it or not, foreign policy is incredibly complicated. And that's the other thing. This idea that Brianna was going in her own way to try to emphasize with Mike Waltz was, listen, you say the solution is simply hit them back harder. Well, maybe we do need to hit them back. Maybe we do need to hit them back very hard. But this idea that that's just going to solve the problem, it's nonsense. That's not how foreign policy has ever been conducted. It may be effective in the short term, may be effective in the long term, but there's no guarantee. And very often, perhaps even more often than not, when we have responded militarily, it's just created more conflict down the road, right? So this idea that Republicans do this all the time, they're hoping to persuade Americans, listen, all it comes down to is just shooting more people or bombing more people. That's not necessarily the case. It's very often the exact opposite of what we would want to do for the sake of long-term stability. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. You're definitely going to be inundated in MAGA lies about this for the foreseeable future. Donald Trump is not going to let it go. But the facts of the matter are this. Attacks like this did occur on his watch. They could occur on the watch of any president. So if you're going to criticize, you should be equitable and even-handed in the criticism. You shouldn't be hyper-partisan. If you're going to criticize Biden and have tough questions for Biden, you should have them for Trump. And moreover, you shouldn't let Trump and his supporters get away with the lies. Soldiers did die on the watch of Donald Trump. More soldiers died on the watch of Donald Trump. And to whatever extent that matters, that means that by that metric, Donald Trump is objectively worse. Let me know what you think in the comments.